Salve, galera! Seja todo mundo bem-vindo, mais uma live aqui. Hoje nós estamos aqui para falar um pouco sobre dinossauros, paleontologia, e nós temos a presença do Michael e do Henrique. Daqui a pouco mais um nosso amigo vai entrar também por aí. E quem estiver chegando, marreta o like, se inscreve no canal, que hoje o papo vai ser interessante. Vou passar agora a palavra para o Henrique, para a gente conversar sobre o assunto. Henrique, fica à vontade aí, manda bala.
Olá, pessoal. Agradeço muito, Shaolin, pelo convite de estar aqui de volta para a gente falar um pouquinho com Michael Benton. Mike, we thank you very much for you to being here, all right? Can you introduce yourself for us?
Yeah. I am professor of paleontology at the University of Bristol in England. I study dinosaurs and mass extinctions. And I have written various textbooks, including this is the new edition 2025 of my vertebrate paleontology. I have loved my visits to Brazil and have had former students, Max Langer and others who we keep in touch.
All right. So now we are going to enter in that scheme. I will talk in Portuguese. Later, I will repeat in English the question. Okay. And after the question in English, you can answer. All right?
Sure.
Olá, eu sou paleontólogo e para mim é um privilégio estar aqui conversando com alguém que contribui há tanto tempo para a nossa ciência, não apenas com pesquisa, que é a contribuição mais comum dos cientistas, mas também com a divulgação, educação e popularização da ciência por meio de livros e programas de TV. Vou mencionar também o programa da Discovery Paleomundo, que teve sua participação na produção. Foi uma gigantesca influência para mim, em vários sentidos, não apenas me educando em paleontologia, mas mantendo meu interesse na área por tempo suficiente até que eu entrasse na universidade para começar meus próprios estudos, mas também me direcionando para o amor pela escavação, né, e pela coleta de fósseis, que é a minha atividade há muitos anos. Eu agradeço aqui pela sua presença. Hello, I'm a paleontologist, and it is a privilege for me to be here talking with someone who has contributed to our science for so long, not only through research, which is the most common contribution from scientists, but also through science communication, education, and popularization via books and TV shows. I must mention that the Discovery Channel show Paleo World, in which you were involved in production, was a huge influence on me in several ways. It not only educated me in paleontology, keeping my interest in the field long enough for me to enter university to start my own studies, but also directed me towards a love for fossil excavation and collecting, which has been my activity for many years. Thank you for your presence.
Mm-hmm.
Again, in Portuguese. O senhor tem publicações de livros a partir da década de 80, tem acompanhado as mudanças de perspectiva que a paleontologia passou pelas últimas décadas, na maneira como vemos o passado, além de conhecer as perspectivas de décadas anteriores. Quais são as principais diferenças que apontaria entre a rotina de trabalho de um paleontólogo da década de 70 ou 80 em comparação com a rotina de um paleontólogo de 2025? O que mudou? O que está melhor e o que está pior? You have published books since the 1980s. You have followed the shifts in paleontological perspectives over the last few decades regarding how we view the past, as well as being familiar with earlier perspectives. What are the main differences you would highlight between the daily routine of a paleontologist from the 70s or 80s compared to that of a paleontologist in 2025? What has changed? What is better and what is worse?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I think that much of what we do is the same. We love to collect fossils. We are excited to discover new localities and new fossils. And every year, for example, there is maybe one new dinosaur named every 2 weeks. So this is a very active endeavor around the world. particularly in new lands like in South America and in China and Africa, which have not been so completely explored. What has changed, I think, is that we have many better techniques to study the fossils. We have better technologies. The most obvious is CT scanning. We can take a fossil in the rock, we can X-ray the fossil and make a 3D model, which opens a whole world of new information that we could not necessarily see. And in addition, there are many computational methods for drawing evolutionary trees, for calculating rates of evolution, for looking at geographic histories of different groups through time as they travel around the world and as the world is changing position of continents and so on. So I think the technology has improved. So for young paleontologists, they have this extra excitement of getting more information from the fossils than we could when I was young.
And I think it's also interesting because you can go back to fossils already described and see new things with this new technology.
That's a really important point, because we rely on excellent museums in every major city, every major country. And you're right that when paleontologists have studied a fossil 100 years ago, they may miss certain information. New fossil discoveries ask us to look for new evidence and the new technologies. So, for example, we can now study fossil feathers and fossil soft tissues in certain cases, which maybe would have been very difficult to study last century, for example.
Yes, one thing I learned also in paleontology is that 100 years ago, they think that only bones could survive in the rocks. So they go straight to the bone, and usually they destroy any feather impressions or scale impressions. And today we must be very careful when the fossil is being prepared.
That's absolutely right. And I think many of the big dinosaur specimens in North America were prepared that way. I think we're now familiar with some of the sites with fossil eggs. Fantastic site in Brazil, where in former generations you could not scan the specimens. They're often quite small and delicate, and some of these dinosaur eggs contain skeletons of the embryo inside, and they even have the skin and some of the soft tissues. So now that makes the information 10 times more valuable, because you can get all this extra information.
Okay, now going to the second question. Vamos começar de novo. Um debate que volta e meia retorna aos ciclos de conversa é sobre a prática de comércio de fósseis e outro tópico paralelo, que é a existência de coleções particulares de fósseis. Não estamos aqui para julgar a opinião alheia e nós não vamos fazer isso. O que eu gostaria era de ouvir a opinião sincera de um pesquisador com larga experiência em um país em que coleções particulares e comércio sempre existiram. Isso atrapalha a ciência, ajuda a níveis interessantes para que o comércio aconteça, porque ele ajuda a descobrir novos espécimes, ou deve ser tudo proibido e os fósseis deveriam apenas ser escavados por pesquisadores e permanecer em coleções públicas. A debate that frequently resurfaces in discussions is about the practice of fossil trading and the related topic of private fossil collections. We are not here to judge others' opinions, and we won't do it, but I would like to hear the sincere view of a researcher with extensive experience in a country where private collections and trading have always existed. Does this hinder science? Help it? Are there interesting levels at which trading should occur because it aids in discovering new species? Or should it all be prohibited, with fossils only excavated by researchers and kept solely in public collections?
This is a great question, and it's a serious issue to be considered in every country, of course. I think that the key point is that for scientific research, the specimens must be in public locations like museums, because a key part of science is that it should be repeatable, and so that some other person can examine the specimens that you have examined. They may disagree with what you said, and yet that is an important part of how science works. However, in practical terms, there are many amateur collectors who are very skillful at finding fossils. I've always been very bad at finding fossils. I go in the field with enthusiastic collectors, and they will often see things that I cannot see. In the UK, most of the private collectors we work with are very happy to donate specimens, and we collaborate with them. So I think they understand we don't have millions of dollars to purchase specimens, and yet they are happy to have an opportunity to use the equipment with us and to collaborate in various ways, which I think is the best arrangement. And then the private specimens become public. They go into the museum collection. In the end, of course, it's not always like that. I realize that specimens are collected and it is costly, and the person may have spent time acquiring material, preparing it. So in some countries, it is legal to sell fossils. Some countries even have enough money that the museums can buy the fossils at commercial prices, but that's quite difficult in the end. But I think this is a solution that each country has to find its best, the best answer to.
All right, thank you. Outro tópico mais recente é sobre imposições que foram propostas para que estudos de fósseis de um determinado país somente podem ser conduzidos e publicados caso na equipe de estudo haja no mínimo um pesquisador do país de origem dos fósseis estudados. Como o senhor vê essa ideia de transportar para os fósseis as fronteiras nacionais, ditando quem deve estudar um fóssil? Another more recent topic involves proposals for impositions stating that fossil studies from a specific country can only be conducted and published if the research team includes at least one researcher from the fossil's country of origin. How do you view the idea of imposing national border on fossils, dictating who should study a fossil?
I think in a normal collaboration between researchers from different countries, it would be perfectly natural and correct that there would be one or more named authors of any publication from the home country, the country where the fossils come from. When we have worked with colleagues in China, in Morocco, in Romania, in Russia, we have always made sure that the researchers, including students from those countries, are a key part of the project. So I think it's a correct behavior, and I think it's important that people promote this idea and remind others that the old days of what sometimes is called parachute paleontology, where the researcher comes from a foreign country, parachutes into the country, throwing around money and then leaves, is not appropriate.
Henrique, tá mutado.
Sorry, I forgot. Let's go. O início da ciência da paleontologia deu-se nos séculos 18 e 19. Estudando a história da nossa ciência, vemos que em todas as épocas os pesquisadores tinham certezas, ou ao menos uma certa segurança de várias interpretações que posteriormente se mostraram equivocadas. Isso é normal, faz parte do avanço do conhecimento científico. Mas uma coisa que me intriga e me preocupa como cientista é que hoje certamente nós temos nossas certezas ou certa segurança, de coisas que no futuro a paleontologia nos mostrará que são equívocos. Diante da sua experiência, o senhor tem algum palpite sobre quais áreas, tópicos ou interpretações atuais devem passar por revisão e mudar mais radicalmente? Sei que não há como prever o futuro, nem prever quais dados novos irão mudar nossas interpretações a respeito dos fósseis. Mas já existe algum tópico que tem mostrado fragilidade, ou alguns tópicos que têm mostrado fragilidade, e, na sua opinião, devem mudar no imaginário dos paleontólogos? The science of paleontology began in the 18th and 19th centuries. Studying the history of our science, we see that researchers in every era had certainties, or at least some confidence, in interpretations of what were later proven incorrect. This is normal, part of the advancement of scientific knowledge. But something that intrigues and worries me as a scientist is that today we certainly have our certainties or confidence in things that in the future of paleontology will show to be mistakes. Given your experience, do you have any guesses about which areas, topics, or current interpretations might need to be revised and change more radically? I understand that it's impossible to predict the future or anticipate what new data will alter our interpretation of fossils. But are there already some topics you can see showing fragility, in your opinion, that might change in the minds of paleontologists?
That's a great question, and it's an important part of being a scientist, that of course our knowledge is always provisional. It is the best hypothesis, or we hope it is the best hypothesis based on current evidence. And within my lifetime, of course, we have seen very big changes in the understanding of the origin of dinosaurs, the extinction of dinosaurs, and the function. So up to a particular point, of course, people reconstructed all the dinosaurs walking somehow like a standing kangaroo. And they were somehow more vertical than horizontal. And there has been a very big switch in the position of the backbone. And the way we reconstruct now seems to be more natural and agrees with the laws of physics. But of course, in all of those fields, we've seen a lot of change in the last 20 or 30 years. So you're quite right. Maybe things will change more in the future. I'll make one small caveat or statement, which is that when I started, most of the comments or theories that people had about the biology of dinosaurs, about the origin and the extinction of dinosaurs and other groups, were based on the authority or opinion of a noted professor. Whereas now I think we work much more with the norms of regular science, which means it doesn't matter whether you are young or old or experienced or not, your hypothesis must depend upon evidence and testing. So we have quantitative computational methods of testing aspects of the evolutionary tree, the relationships of the different groups. We have much better knowledge of the dating and the geochemistry and other aspects of extinction events. So we can look at the end Cretaceous extinction event in ways that we could not do before. And we're lucky that there are lots of non-paleontologists who are really interested in all of this, and they are getting involved. And so when the first proposal came in 1980 that the Earth had been hit by a huge meteorite and that this killed the dinosaurs, most paleontologists, including me, thought this is crazy, this is shocking, this is nonsense. But based on the evidence and further study and the involvement of geochemists and planetary geologists and lots of other people, this now becomes a very well-supported hypothesis. What we could reject in the future, I just don't know. I guess some of the work on feeding and locomotion, we do our best, but we don't have total ways of testing exactly how different dinosaurs or other animals are feeding, what they are eating, and some estimates of the degree of warm-bloodedness. Were the dinosaurs, were the marine reptiles warm-blooded, cold-blooded, something between? These are quite hard to estimate right now. And I guess in the next 10 years, we may get some better methods, which will change ideas quite a bit. And then we're lucky that there are plenty of people reading and making sure they keep the various books and other sources up to date.
Yeah, you gave me a lot of ideas now. Thank you very much, Mike. This was my questions, all right? Giovanni, é contigo. Now we are going to Giovanni.
Eu me apresento aqui para ele formalmente.
Isso.
Então, o pessoal da live que talvez já me conheça, né? Prazer, Giovanni, sou biólogo, não sou paleontólogo, mas tenho muito interesse na paleontologia. Me formei estudando primatas, agora estou trabalhando com felinos, ao passo que eu estou dando aulas sobre a evolução dos dinossauros para o pessoal da graduação no quarto semestre. E fiz uns modelinhos didáticos e tal, apresentei inclusive um trabalho do Mike lá. So, my name is Giovanni, I'm a biologist, and I'm not exactly a paleontologist, I'm a zoologist, have been working with primates mainly, and in my master's now I'm working with field conservation, and I'm developing a project of education about the evolution of skulls and birds and dinosaurs. I've made some 3D models by hand, and I'm teaching about feeding mechanics, about the senses, the different areas of the brain, the different areas of the skull, the patterns of evolutionary trends, and mainly in cellular in general. I've done like 5-3D skulls being the T-Rex, a Velociraptor, Archaeopteryx, and Confuciusornis, and a hummingbird. And I presented to my students some of your works, mainly about dinosaur feeding ecology. I've talked to them that I'll be here interviewing you, and so it's a great honor. I believe that basically anyone who's willing to work with vertebrate paleontology has come to your works. I kind of impressed now. I got a book. My friend brought it back from Manchester. I don't have it right here because I'm on the countryside. I live in the capital of my state, and I left the book there. But it's one of the most recent ones about dinosaurs. They got a Tupandactylus illustration on the cover.
Yes.
Great. Amazing. It's beautiful. And it got me, that exactly book got me my question about which are the main trends you have seen developing in the last years of paleontology and what you foresee for the future. It's kind of similar to Enrique's question, but like what you believe that will change the most that hasn't yet changed in terms of analysis, in terms of, I don't know, excavation parts that have been each time more delicate. I have worked with some fossil fishes and has been extremely time consuming because as I'm from Ceará, and Ceará has some of the best formations in terms of preservation.
Yeah.
They're exquisite, but very hard to work because they have so much preserved material, so much evidences. It's such a great state that it's hard to work with.
Of course. So I think two things I would mention, I guess. One, you talk about exceptional fossil specimens. And I think we have better ways of working with these amazing fossils. And for people who have not seen them, often the fossils will preserve not just the bones or the shells, but also the muscles and other soft tissues. And so there are now methods of working on these without damaging the fossils, but understanding the chemistry of preservation and then using very powerful microscopes to see right down to the kind of finest detail of the structure of the muscle, the structure of the bone. And people often misunderstand and think that because, for example, a fossil fish or a fossil dinosaur is somehow turned into rock. We use the term petrifaction, which is a classical word meaning made into rock. Yes, but actually when you cut some of these specimens to make a thin section or look at them under the microscope, they often show as much detail as tissue from a modern animal, right down to the cells, the finest cells. And I think you mentioned also functional studies, and I think that's been a huge advance, where the principle of uniformitarianism, meaning the physical laws of the present day can apply to the past. And so that if we have a method in biomechanics is the application of engineering and physics to biology, looking at how fast an animal runs or which muscles and exactly how the skeleton operates when an animal is running or climbing or doing different things. And we can apply exactly these methods to fossil organisms and using the same ways of calculation. And so when you're looking at the speed of movement or the strength of the bone, two questions about T-Rex. Could T-Rex bite a car in half? Yes, of course, because its bite force can be calculated, and it's something like 4 or 5 tons of force. How fast would it run? Not very fast, maybe 20 kilometers per hour or less, which sounds fast, but when you're a big animal with big stride length, that's not very fast at all. And so that can be calculated from fossil trackways and from looking at the nature of the limb bone. So I think all of those are new ways of looking at things where we can get more information in a more reliable kind of way. And the great thing about all of that is if somebody doesn't like what you have done, if they say this is nonsense, you can say, maybe, but you can't just say that. You have to go and test, and you have to show where we made a mistake in our calculation. It's not just the opinion like it used to be. Professor X says this, Professor Y hates Professor X, and then they argue. But they're not talking in scientific terms. And I think this is a big advantage now. That if you do good science and careful science, people will appreciate that.
Excellent. Oh, and there is a question from Shaolin itself. Como os eventos, como a grande explosão cambriana, as grandes extinções em massa, influenciaram a diversidade de vida na Terra? Qual o nível de relevância disso para a gente chegar na biodiversidade atual? So it's like, how much the events like Cambrian explosion and the great extinctions have influenced the diversity of life on Earth today?
It's a great question, and I think it's a really important part of the of paleontology, because these are the kinds of big events that you can only discover by looking at the fossil records. So the Cambrian explosion was the time more than 500 million years ago when all the different groups of animals came onto the Earth, mostly in the oceans at first. And we see it in the fossil record because there is an appearance of many, many fossils with shells and skeletons and the rest. And likewise, mass extinctions are now quite well understood. These are times when maybe 50% or more of species disappear very rapidly. And everybody is familiar with the event at the end of the Cretaceous, 66 million years ago, when the dinosaurs and the ammonites and many other groups died out. And there were many other such mass extinctions through geological time. And they are negative in one regard because, of course, they kill a lot of stuff, but they have a positive aspect because after the extinction event, life recovers, comes back. And so all of these kinds of big events they're really one of the most exciting areas of paleontology, because you can provide information that is of importance to modern biologists who are trying to understand modern biodiversity. And we can say truthfully then, a lot of modern biodiversity was shaped by these big events in the past. You can actually track back to certain points. So for example, After the end Cretaceous mass extinction on land, the dinosaurs had gone, and very soon after that, you get the very first tropical rainforests, like in Brazil, with the enormous diversity of life. And as far as we know, there was nothing like that before, during the age of dinosaurs, with that enormous diversity of insects and other animals living within the forest, and thousands of different species of plants within, 1 or 2 hectares. It's just a kind of level of biodiversity that was triggered by that last mass extinction event.
Perfeito. E aí, mais uma consideração com relação a esses eventos históricos de biodiversificação. Será que a gente não superestima, dentro das ideias de biologia evolutiva, a questão da competição e subestima as relações ecológicas mutualistas, que elas estão associadas ao aumento de diversidade, né? Principalmente no grupo dos insetos, por exemplo? So it's like an ecological question. We tend to overestimate the importance of competition, predation in evolutionary terms. Are we underestimating somehow the relevance of more mutualistic relationships, like the one bees have with flowers, like the ones we have between the microbiome and the host organism? And how important can this be about the diversification patterns we have, mainly in insects, which we find like a high degree of specificity between pollinator insects?
It's very difficult to estimate the relative importance of different factors in describing biodiversity today, or indeed presumably at any point in the past. We know that competition and predation dominate within modern ecosystems, and they provide the shape and stability. And also we know that co-evolutionary relationships, like between flowers and insects that pollinate, are very long-lasting and very important for the success, perhaps, of one whole family or major group of plants, and indeed a whole major group of insects. And if you disturb that, it may have big consequences. But also we know that various environmental events are very important in changing biodiversity. The El Nino kind of events can have a big effect, but often not permanent, because although they are devastating for a short time, often life somehow comes back and the stability of the ecosystem is restored. But then some of these big events that we were mentioning, including times of major climate change, temperature change, all of that, they can have a more lasting effect because they may completely kill a whole group. And then the ecosystem is incomplete, something is missing, and there has to be some big evolution going on. But yeah, I think it's one of the fascinating facts about biology. It is very complex. We cannot reduce it to equations like in physics, and this connection and interplay of biological and external environmental factors is really crucial, and I don't think in the end you can measure and say which is more important.
Gotta get a new journal, like a new phrase. I've said that biology is the science of emergent properties. It's always the sum of parts is not equivalent to the whole. So in that line, I asked this because I was thinking about the evolution of herbivory and the first vertebrates in Permian, because today in some populations of lizards, for example, you can have a different dietary profile related to their different gut microbiomes. So I was guessing, they may have this kind of event in the distant past. We will never know, but I don't know. It's maybe a possibility in terms of digestive systems.
I guess that's harder to study in fossils. You need complete information.
So the next question is about cladistics. Nas últimas décadas, a gente teve uma mudança de paradigma da forma que a gente lida com os táxons. ela passou de táxons que são muito funcionais, ou agrupados por semelhanças importantes, para uma tendência muito forte de usar clados, né? E a questão é que isso não é tão prático, apesar de ser muito útil para a gente entender a identidade dos seres vivos, não é tão fácil de fazer e exige um grande número de nomes. Será que a cladística vai entrar em declínio de alguma forma na paleontologia? So, in the last decades, we have developed a new paradigm in this work, that is the cladistics. We used to have classification systems more based in similarity than in parsimony. So, do you imagine that this kind of paradigm will change in the next decades, or is a very solidified trend that we keep using like the cladistics to group to taxa?
Yeah, I think it's all we have got. Maybe something better will be found, but for studies that are only including fossils, it seems to be the best approach. There are other methods, of course, within the field of Bayesian statistics. They often give the same results, so they operate differently, but can confirm. I think a very important advance in recent years has been if you are working on fossil groups where there are some living examples, we now accept that you would use the phylogenomic tree as a basis, so that we look to modern biology for genomic information on evolution, because it works. And the best example is from mammals, where hundreds of paleontologists had tried to resolve an evolutionary tree of mammals. They've done the same for birds. It more or less failed until genomic data, DNA data, was used. And then in both cases, particularly for mammals, the greatest illustration, of course, was the discovery of Afrotheria, which nobody had predicted from anatomy or behavior or fossils or anything. And so important to understand that there was this early split in mammal evolution, modern mammal evolution, between South America and Africa, and that this was kind of fundamental. And so I think most paleontologists say, we accept Afrotheria, we have to. And then you have what we call a framework or a scaffold, and then you can insert the fossils using cladistics. But I think you have to accept the genomic tree. So I think this is the current way. I can see that in the future there may be some evolution of those methods, but it seems to work quite well.
It's really useful because sometimes you can extend or diminish the prevalence of ghost lineages in the fossil records.
Yeah,
it's very important.
Well, that's important as well, because I think there were misunderstandings from the molecular side often about how to use fossils in reconstructing a time tree. In other words, an evolutionary tree with a time scale. And initially people would use maybe one fossil, and then you realize that's not good and that you should use many fossils. And it really matters. It turns out to be really, really important that you have to not just use one fossil at the very bottom, but try to find a few that fit in different places. And the more that you can use fitting in the correct positions, the better the quality.
More the right fossils. Amazing. So
I have to apologize. I think I have to stop now. So sorry. And but very happy to continue another time. And yeah. So please tell me when, and it's very good to meet you all again, and thank you. And
because I already got my first question for the next time. Sorry. It's about the integrative taxonomic or integrative systematics. It's like people devo mainly.
Thank you very much, Dr. Benton.
See you later. Ciao.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
There.
Right, here we go.
It's kind of meeting a childhood idol. Got it.